WorldAlign is an online journal aimed at provoking thought and opinion, with the hope to start and deepen conversations between communities and within communities, out of which we may become a better world.
It's available at fine bookstores everywhere, but I think there are some copies here tonight. I'll show you the chapter I have on the book, great book, Zen at War, which describes the relationship between Zen Buddhism and Japanese emperor and god worship and imperialism and the hell that begins when the sleep of reason brings forth monsters of that kind. Now, I suppose you could say that the book of Genesis that describes the Garden of Eden is a Christian book. It's considered by Christians, it's a Jewish book, to have anticipated everything they need to know. There were some early Christians who thought that Christianity would do better by cutting off the Old Testament books instead of taking them on. I think they were probably wise to think of that. But to say that it's voluntary to be born into a garden where the boss talks to you all the time and tells you what you may and may not do and specifically warns you against using your own curiosity about furthering your knowledge and says that's the sin that's equivalent to death is voluntary of a kind, I suppose you could possibly say. But it doesn't satisfy any definition of which I'm aware that is that of free will. Christianity does not say that the Son of God, having been crucified, will be seen again in 3 days. It's in 3 days that he was claimed by some, no one authoritative, to have been seen again. What he is quoted as having said is that he would return with the kingdom of God in the lifetime of his disciples. And this has led to an enormous number of stories from the wandering Jew onward that have to prove that someone will always stay alive till the end of time, so that prophecy, so not vindicated, so absolutely crucially and pathetically disproven, can't be finally disproved. That's why the wandering Jew still walks, because someone has to be alive who was at Calvary, lest the most vain and foolish and sad prophecy ever made be shown to be what it is, as all other religions are, covered in the obvious, self-evident, for anyone to notice, fingerprints of the absolutely man-made. It's all man-made, and it shows. Thank you.
And now we have the third question, which is, what about science and reason?
Oh dear, well, I'm not ready. And I don't know much about science, and I hope that my reason is innate, but I'll say this much. It isn't as some people maintain, or as some of us, the new atheists, who, by the way, I heard described as, what was it? The old ones were dead and irrelevant as compared to me. I mean, I'm a lot nearer to being dead than I was when I wrote my book. But I hope no nearer to being irrelevant. The two things, let's hope, are not the same. It's said of us and of our distinguished atheist predecessors that we think that science and reason are not compatible with religion. That's not really true. I mean, to put it negatively, Isaac Newton, who was in his time the greatest ever scientist, believed that if you were a Roman Catholic, you were a supporter of the Antichrist. If you believed in the doctrine of the Trinity, you were a votary of the devil. He practiced alchemy. He several times set fire to his rooms in Cambridge. He was such a devoted believer in alchemy that he kept a furnace going all the time, trying to transmit base metals into gold, and was greatly more interested in finding out what the original measurements of the temple had been, and thought there was much more truth to be found there than in any of his theories of gravitation. So you can very easily be a man of science and evidence and reason and still be, because you will be what you are, namely an imperfectly evolved primate, a raging crackpot. Alfred Russel Wallace, who is accused by some, and I think actually quite fairly accused by some, of having done a great deal of Darwin's work for him, possibly of being the man who Darwin was the most afraid to acknowledge, lest he would have to acknowledge more than he liked about the evolution and separation and discrete nature of species. Why it is, in other words, you don't find kangaroos anywhere, only in some places. And of course never in the Bible, because the Bible didn't know there were marsupials, but never mind that. And who accidentally, because he studied this in Indonesia, came across a theory that's very new to us. It's almost less than a century old. The self-evident theory of continental drift. Alfred Russel Wallace was mainly happy when attending a spiritualist seance and rapping tables and trying to get burblings from the beyond. You can go on like this with distinguished scientists all you like, and you won't run out of examples. I guess those are my two favorite ones. And the great Stephen Jay Gould, from whom so many people in our own time learned so much about evolutionary biology, decided to negotiate this like a good American pluralist with a respect for multiculturalism and pluralism, and say, well, science and religion are non-overlapping magisteria, as it were. They deal with completely different things. This isn't really true, in my opinion. I think there is a radical incompatibility, and it's of a philosophical kind, not a scientific one. You either believe that you are here because of the operations of evolution by randomness and natural selection, combination of the two. But it makes not much more sense to ask, why are we here, than to ask, why are cats here, or why are falcons here? Or you believe that we are, in some sense, not just the products of, as Dinesh has, I think not very plausibly argued, design, but also the objects of design. Now you have to understand that anyone who makes either assertion in your hearing, and again I'm talking to people who predominantly still undergoing their higher education, anyone who says that we are either the products of, let alone the objects of, a design, has yet to produce one scintilla of evidence that would stand any kind of peer review in any kind of journal with any pretense to call itself scientific. They have, in other words, all of their work still ahead of them. So Dinesh, you may as well take your shovel and start now.
I think if you are trying to address the issue of design, there is a foolish way to go about it that becomes a kind of straw man for atheist rebuttal. To see what I'm getting at, it would be a little bit like this. If you were trying to figure out who wrote Hamlet, I would make an argument from design and say, look, Hamlet has a plot. It's got a narrative, it's got complexity, it shows all the signatures of design. I may not know who wrote it, but someone wrote it. Christopher Hitchens says, no, we don't need to infer a designer, even though we have a plot. In fact, let's do like Hamlet. Let's look around the castle in Denmark. In fact, let's search all of Denmark and say, wait a minute, we don't see William Shakespeare. Therefore, he must not exist. All we see is the characters in the play. Well, the point is, God is a cause of the universe in the same way that the author is the cause of a book. You can infer the existence of the author from the plot and complexity of the book, but you're not going to find the author in the book unless he chooses to write himself into the plot. So what I'm getting at here is design can be inferred at two different levels. Now, let me say a little bit of a word about science and take a different tack here, because very often when we talk about science, Christians get attacked for making the argument that is called the God of the gaps. In other words, you find things that are unexplained. The original cell and its complexity, consciousness, morality. And in a sense, the atheist goes, well, you find something that science hasn't explained, a gap, and you attribute that to God. And for the atheist, the gap